The HOA tried to demolish my house. Problem is, I wasn't in their HOA. They sent fake officers, forged notices, and demanded $18,000 to fix the neighborhood's aesthetic. But they made one mistake. I record everything. And this is the story of how their entire empire collapsed. But before the war, before the lawsuits, there was just silence. When I left Boston, there was no dramatic explosion behind me, no shouting match, no scandal on the news, no dramatic walkout, just exhaustion. Years of noise, clutter, responsibility, and a marriage that died long before the papers were signed. The day the divorce was finalized, the courthouse hallway felt quieter than any home I'd lived in for the last decade. And that quiet did something to me. It reminded me I hadn't felt peace in years, not real peace. So, I packed up what I needed, sold what I didn't, liquidated the last of my antique business, and drove south until the cold Boston wind couldn't find me anymore. I didn't plan on Virginia. Honestly, I didn't plan on anything. Then I saw the listing. It wasn't even a proper listing, just 3 washed-out photos and a line that read, "Pre-war home, as is, needs full restoration." Most folks would have skipped right past it, but when I pulled into that long gravel drive and saw the house in person, it felt like déjà vu, like something waiting for me. A 1940s mansion, abandoned, weather-beaten, and leaning like a man who had been standing too long. Stucco peeling in wide curls, stained glass windows cracked like old china, Spanish tiles broken and scattered across the lawn. But beneath the dust and rot, I could feel the history. Good bones. Solid craftsmanship. The kind of home someone built with pride because they thought their grandchildren would still be living in it. The neighborhood around it was the exact opposite. Stonecrest, perfect driveways, perfect shutters, perfect mailboxes. The kind of place where even the birds probably had to file noise complaints. And there, sitting at the far edge like a stubborn relic refusing to die, was my house. The listing agent whispered, "It's a tear down," like she was telling me a secret the house shouldn't hear. But I didn't see a tear down. I saw a second chance, maybe for me more than the building. So I paid $180 cash, less than what half the folks in Stonecrest spent on their shiny new SUVs. She blinked when I handed over the cashier's check, like she was waiting for a punchline, but there wasn't one. I drove back that afternoon with a rented truck full of hand tools, tarps, and a box of old jazz records. If I was going to rebuild something, my life, my house, I wanted to do it slow and honest. For a while, the only sound in my days was the rhythm of work, hammer on wood, tile against tile, the sigh of old beams settling as if grateful to be touched again. And in the evenings, when I sat on the decaying porch with a cup of strong coffee, I could almost hear the past breathing. But even in that quiet, I felt eyes on me. Across the street, behind a curtain that never fully closed, stood a woman. Tight blonde bun, pearls, posture like she swallowed a broom handle. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just watched. Sometimes she'd nudge another neighbor and gesture toward my roof, or the scaffolding, or the pile of reclaimed lumber by my truck. Always with that look, a mixture of suspicion and superiority. Back then, I didn't know her name, didn't know what she was capable of, didn't know she'd one day send fake officers to my gate, forge demolition notices, or try to shake me down for $18,000. All I knew was this. For the first time in years, I had a place worth protecting, a place with history, a place no one, especially not some HOA queen, was going to take from me. And unfortunately for Stonecrest, peace is something I'm willing to fight for. When you spend years collecting antiques, handling delicate things built long before you were born, you develop a sort of reverence for craftsmanship. Tools from the 1920s still work if you treat them right. Furniture from the 1880s still stands if you understand the grain. And old houses. Old houses respond to patience the way people do. So the first few months in Virginia were simple, honest, quiet. I woke with the sun, even though I'd never been a morning person in Boston. There's something about the way daylight hits a broken window that makes you want to stand up and fix it. The roof came first. Spanish tiles, most cracked, some shattered, a few holding on like old soldiers refusing to fall. I spent a week carefully lifting them, stacking what could be saved, ordering replacements from a small outfit in Colorado that still hand presses clay tiles the way craftsmen did a century ago. Then came the porch. Layers of beige paint hid something beautiful beneath, a hint of Art Deco ironwork, not fancy, not loud, just elegant in the understated way Americans used to build when form and function weren't enemies. The garden was next, or what was left of it. When I bought the place, the shrubs had grown wild and angry, twisting into each other like they were trying to strangle the old flower beds. But if you looked close, really looked, you could see the ghost outlines of symmetry. Raised beds, old brick edging, a pattern someone had drawn with intention back in 1946. So, I researched, dug into archives, tracked down a worn blueprint of the original landscaping, and had it framed inside the hallway like a piece of art. Then I went outside, pulled up the hedges by hand, and replanted every single bed according to the old plan. Not modern flowers, no neon hybrids or HOA-approved pastels. No, I filled it with the same varieties listed on the 1946 sheet. Dusty pink climbing roses, boxwoods trimmed into gentle curves, lavender that smelled like summer mornings. And every time I stood back to admire the progress, I felt something inside me settle, like each repair was stitching up an old wound, both the house's and my own. Of course, the neighbors had their opinions. SUVs slowed to a crawl as I worked. Some folks just stared, pretending they were checking their mirrors. Others took photos discreetly, though not discreetly enough for me to miss. One woman even stopped her morning jog, hands on her hips, and said, "Are you allowed to do all that?" I smiled and told her yes, then asked, "Allowed by who exactly?" She jogged away without answering. Across the street, behind her ever-present curtain, the blonde woman, Karen, kept watching. Sometimes with binoculars, sometimes with a notebook, sometimes with that expression people wear when they believe everything around them is their responsibility. I noticed she'd started having little sidewalk meetings with other neighbors. She'd gesture toward my house, shake her head, fold her arms. They'd nod, whisper, walk away looking uneasy. But no one approached me, not yet. Instead, that quiet suburban tension kept building the way summer heat does, slow, invisible, but undeniable. Still, in those days, I shrugged it off. After a life in Boston, a little gossip didn't bother me. Besides, the work kept me grounded. Replacing floorboards with reclaimed oak, repointing brick with mortar mixed by hand, reinforcing sagging archways with mahogany beams sourced from an old barn a county over. 8 months passed that way. Sunrise to sunset, coffee, tools, sweat, jazz on the radio, a rhythm that felt more like praying than building. And finally, the house transformed. The stained glass window above the stairwell, the one that once looked like a shattered kaleidoscope, now glowed with cobalt, amber, and wine red when the morning sun hit it. The porch stood level and proud. The roofline straightened like a man standing up after years of being hunched. The garden, my God, the garden, looked like it had stepped out of an old photograph. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't modern, but it was beautiful in a way that made people slow down as they passed, whether they wanted to or not. And for one brief moment, I believed the worst was behind me. But sometimes, peace is just the last breath before the storm rolls in. And mine was coming in fast, on 4 black tires, dark-tinted windows, and the subtle hum of an SUV engine that didn't belong on a quiet Virginia morning. The morning they showed up, I remember thinking how unusually still everything felt. The oak branches weren't stirring. Even the birds were quieter than usual, like they sensed something off. I was on the porch tightening the last bolt on a railing bracket when I heard the crunch of gravel. Slow, deliberate, heavy. A black SUV rolled to a stop at my gate. Tinted windows, no city plates. Engine idling with that low hum that makes your stomach tighten before your brain even catches up. 2 men stepped out. The first one was tall, too tall for how stiffly he carried himself. Short military-style haircut, mirror sunglasses, a jaw clenched so tight he looked like he chewed concrete for breakfast. His shirt looked like a police uniform if someone ordered it off a discount tactical website. Badge-shaped patch, but no real badge. Thick belt, but instead of a sidearm, he carried a cheap taser clipped to his hip. The second man was shorter, broader in the shoulders, hair slicked back, wearing khakis and a button-up with a shiny laminated ID swinging from his belt. On it, Inspector, Compliance Division. Compliance with what? He didn't say. They didn't knock, didn't call out, just started walking up the driveway like they owned the place. I wiped my hands on a rag, kept my expression polite, and stepped off the porch. "Morning," I said. The tall one spoke first. His voice had that practiced authority, like someone who had watched too many police dramas. "Mr. Pierce?" "That's me," I replied. He didn't offer a handshake, didn't smile, just shifted his weight and said, "I'm Officer David Lawn, Stone Rest Police Division." I almost laughed. Police Division? Stone Rest wasn't even a real town. It was just the neighborhood name. But I kept my face relaxed, almost confused. Playing dumb was the smartest thing I could do. His partner stepped forward. "And this," David continued, "is Inspector Ross Lond." Inspector Ross gave me a slow once-over, then looked up at the restored roofline like it personally offended him. "We've received multiple complaints," Ross said. "Unauthorized restoration, architectural violations. This structure is not approved under the Stonecrest Legacy HOA standards." I let out a small, confused chuckle. "I'm not in your HOA?" They exchanged a look, not a good one. The kind bullies share when their target says something they didn't expect. David cleared his throat. "That's debatable." Then he mimicked the stance police use when they want to seem taller. "This home is within what we refer to as the visual influence zone of Stonecrest Legacy. That makes it subject to HOA architectural expectations." I raised an eyebrow. "Visual influence zone?" I repeated it slowly, like I was trying to understand a new vocabulary word. Ross jumped in eagerly. "Yes, that means your property affects the harmony and visual continuity of the neighborhood aesthetic. Therefore, is that a legal term?" I asked softly. Ross's eyes flickered. For a second he faltered, then plastered on a tight smile. "It's recognized internally. Internally by the HOA. Not by the city, not by the county, not by the state. Translation, completely made up." I stayed perfectly still, keeping the act going, tilted my head, as if genuinely troubled. "So, what happens if I don't meet these, visual expectations?" Ross straightened proudly, taking the bait. "Well, if you don't cooperate, we can initiate enforcement, fees, penalties, or even condemnation if safety issues are found." David added, "The city usually sides with us." There it was, the word. Condemnation. A powerful, dangerous term when used by someone who actually has authority. Criminal if used by someone who doesn't. I widened my eyes just a touch. Condemnation? You mean tear the place down? "It's possible," Ross said calmly. "As enforcement officers, we have the authority." I almost clapped. Authority? Officers? He wasn't even trying to hide the lie. But instead of recording it openly, I leaned into my role. I let my voice shake just a little. Okay, I'm not trying to break any rules. I hesitated. Perfectly timed. "What exactly do you want from me?" Ross pulled a folded piece of paper from his clipboard and tapped it. "You have two options," he said, as if reading from a script. "One," he raised a finger, "you register retroactively with Stonecrest Legacy HOA and pay 3 years dues plus fines, about $18,000 total." David nodded, arms crossed, looking smug. "Or," Ross continued, "we file an architectural non-compliance notice and begin safety inspection proceedings. And trust me, we always find something." I pretended to swallow hard. 18,000, that's a lot. David's smirk grew. "That's the easy option." I let my shoulders slump just enough, made them believe I was overwhelmed. Then, quietly, I asked, "If I pay, do we avoid all the enforcement?" Ross leaned in like a salesman closing a deal. "Absolutely." I paused, looked down at the gravel. Let silence hang long enough for both of them to think they had me. Then I lifted my head, voice steady. "You two finished?" Their smiles faded. I held up my phone, screen off, because they didn't need to know it was recording from my pocket camera instead. "You're trespassing," I said, "and unless you have an actual city-issued warrant in that clipboard, I'm going to need you off my property." Ross stiffened. David's jaw jumped. "You're making a mistake," David muttered. "No," I replied, stepping back toward my porch. "The mistake was assuming I scare easy." They left in a storm of gravel and indignation. And the moment their SUV disappeared down the road, I exhaled, walked inside, and opened a new folder on my laptop. Stonecrest Threat Log, Entry 1. They didn't even give me 24 hours. The next morning, before sunrise had fully crept over the treetops, my security app chimed. Motion detected. Front gate. I thought maybe it was a deer, or the mail truck running early, but when I checked the live feed, I saw it. That same black SUV, same tinted windows, same slow, territorial crawl up my driveway like a predator returning to unfinished business. I actually laughed, soft, tired, and unbelieving, because not even I thought they'd be this predictable. I stepped outside with my coffee, still in my work boots, and waited on the porch as the Lawn brothers climbed out. No good morning, no courtesy, no hesitation, just that entitled march toward my house like they owned not just the street, but the soil underneath it. David stopped a few feet from the steps, shoulders puffed out. "Mr. Pierce," he said flatly. Ross was already rifling through his clipboard, pretending to review papers that were probably printed in his garage. "You forgot something yesterday," Ross added. "Oh?" I sipped my coffee. "Did you forget your dignity up here?" Neither of them cracked a smile. Ross held out a sheet of paper, cheap copy paper, flimsy, the kind that wrinkles if you breathe on it. "This is your official stop work order until Stonecrest Legacy HOA reviews your architectural plans." I didn't take it. Instead, I looked at it like it was a strange insect I wasn't sure I wanted to touch. "Official?" I asked. "Yes," Ross lied smoothly. "And refusal to comply can escalate to fines, citations, or—" He paused, letting the threat hang. "Enforcement." I let my voice tremble, just barely. "Enforcement like what you mentioned yesterday?" David nodded gravely, as if reassuring a patient before delivering a fatal diagnosis. "Correct." I made sure my shoulders slumped. "And if I'm out of compliance, what happens?" "Could be civil penalties, could be criminal, could be condemnation," Ross said, casual as reading a weather report. I stared at him like someone trying to understand something terrifying. Criminal?" I stammered, very convincing. Award-winning, really. Ross softened his voice, the way scammers do when they think they're closing the deal. "Look, nobody wants that. Pay the dues, join the HOA retroactively, and this all goes away. 18,000. That's nothing compared to what legal trouble would cost you." I swallowed hard, loudly enough for my body mic to catch it. "So, you two can arrest me?" David answered immediately. "We have enforcement authority here." It took everything in me not to grin. Enforcement authority. The phrase that would burn them alive in court. I let my voice get small, vulnerable even. "If I pay, do you guarantee no inspections, no condemnation, no trouble?" Ross gave a slow, satisfied nod. "Absolutely, but we need payment processed before the end of the week. And if we have to come back again, the fee goes up." There it was, the whole scam, laid out with confidence. And stupidity. I finally took the paper, not because I believed it, but because I wanted the fingerprints. The seal was pixelated, the formatting crooked, the signature typed, not written. I held it up, squinting. "Is this from the city?" David's jaw flexed. "It's recognized through our authority." I let out a confused little breath. "Your HOA authority?" "No," Ross snapped. "Our compliance authority with the community." Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I straightened up then, dropped the act completely. "Well, I appreciate your visit, gentlemen," I said calmly. "Now I'll ask you again. Do either of you have a city-issued warrant, a permit, a badge, anything at all that grants you legal jurisdiction on my land?" Silence. Just the distant hum of their SUV engine ticking as it cooled. I'd never seen two men look both insulted and panicked at the same time. Finally, David muttered, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I replied quietly. "You're mistaking my porch for a stage where you can play dress-up." Their jaws tightened. "Leave," I said, stepping back toward my door. "You've got 10 seconds before I call the sheriff and report attempted extortion under color of authority." Ross's face twitched, not anger, but fear. They didn't protest this time, didn't threaten, didn't even try to bluff. They just turned and walked back to their SUV, the bravado gone, the scam slipping through their fingers. As the tires kicked up gravel again, I lifted my phone and pressed save on the recording. Entry 2 now had its place, and for the first time, I realized something. These two weren't just bullies. They were amateurs, and amateurs always make mistakes. After the Lon brothers' second visit, the house felt different, not haunted, just watched. I kept working on the staircase railings, but something in the back of my mind wouldn't settle. Their stop work order lay on the kitchen table, mocking me with every crooked line of false authority. Late that afternoon, with the sun dipping low and the whole world turning amber, I finally sat down with the copy Ross shoved at me. Right away it was wrong. The header said, Stonecrest Legacy Enforcement Division, Architectural Compliance Unit. A division that didn't exist, a unit that had no registration, and the seal was just a blurry circle with something resembling an eagle, except the eagle had 6 feathers on one side and 5 on the other, like it had been traced by a drunk man using Microsoft Paint. I flipped the page over, blank, no city address, no county reference, no stamp, no case number, just threats. It was the kind of document scammers hoped you'd panic over, the kind they counted on you not having the backbone to question. I pulled my laptop closer, opened my folder, Stonecrest threat log. Entry 2 was already inside. I added photos of the fake stop work order, zooming in on every flaw. It wasn't just sloppy, it was careless. A rush job. Somewhere between comparing the seal to a real county permit stamp, I heard it. The slow grumble of an engine pulling up the dirt road outside. Not the Lon brothers. This one was older, throatier, with a loose belt squeal when it turned. I peeked out the window and spotted an old Ford F-150, mid-80s, faded red, one headlight foggy like cataracts. Behind the wheel was a man I hadn't met, though I'd seen him from afar. Tall, thin like a fence post, with a long gray beard and a trucker cap pulled so low it almost touched his nose. He killed the engine, climbed out, and shut the door with a gentle click instead of a slam. That told me everything. This man respected old things. He didn't slam doors. He didn't waste gestures. He walked up to the porch slowly. I stepped out to meet him. "You Pierce?" he asked, voice like gravel being dragged across a tin roof. "That's me." He nodded once, looked at the house, then said, "You've stirred up the hornet's nest, son." I blinked. "Sir, I'm just trying to restore this place. I haven't bothered anybody." He sniffed. "That's the problem. Around here, minding your business is enough to get folks nervous. Especially her." "Her?" I asked, though a suspicion already pricked at me. He jerked his thumb toward the cul-de-sac across the tree line, just barely visible. "The woman running Stonecrest, Karen Bullock. She wants control, always has." I absorbed that. "Do you know her well?" I asked. "Know of her," he corrected. "And that's plenty." Then he leaned in slightly. "But I know those Lon boys better." That made my stomach drop a little. "Oh?" I ventured. He chuckled without humor, a dry sound. "Those two? Contractors, not police, not inspectors. They're hired muscle who bounce between HOA jobs and repo gigs. Saw 'em last year trying to seize a guy's boat without paperwork." He looked toward my house again. "They're playing dress-up, and you're the latest target." I crossed my arms. "You talk like you've seen this before." "I have," he said simply. "Bullylock's got a plan. This old place sits on the wrong patch of land for her tastes." There it was, the motive I hadn't yet found. "What exactly does she want?" He shrugged, then said something that stuck to my ribs like cold iron. "Rumor is she wants your land for an expansion. Clubhouse, parking, whatever makes her queen bee over a bigger hive." I thought about the stop work order, the threats, the fake authority. "Why tell me?" I asked cautiously. He pulled a folded sheet from his back pocket, old, worn, edges soft from time. "This," he said, handing it to me, "showed up in my mailbox this morning. Thought you ought to see it." I unfolded the paper. It was the same fake enforcement form, same seal. Except this one had my address typed at the top, and his address scribbled in by hand as adjacent violation witness. They were broadening the scam, dragging neighbors into it, setting up a narrative. My hands tightened. The old man, Crane, as I'd later learn his name, just watched me. "Son," he said quietly, "I mind my own business, but but you're being set up, and you ain't the first." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of cut grass, old clay, and something else, something colder. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. "Crane," I said, "would you be willing to talk to the sheriff if this becomes something bigger?" He smirked. "Boy, I'd pay cash money to watch those two idiots explain themselves to a real cop." He tipped his hat, climbed into his old Ford, and drove off, slow, steady, like a man who had seen storms before and knew another was coming. As the taillights disappeared, I walked back inside. For the first time since buying the mansion, I realized this wasn't just a restoration project, it was a battlefield. And someone hiding behind curtains and HOA paperwork, had just made their first real mistake. They woke up a man who wasn't about to roll over. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was scared, but because what Crane said kept circling in my mind like a buzzard over a wounded deer. A clubhouse expansion, parking lots, an HOA queen needing a bigger kingdom. Every piece of it made sense. Too much sense. I was in the kitchen around 6 a.m., making coffee the old-fashioned way, percolator on the stove, slow and steady, when my phone buzzed again. Security alert. Motion detected. West tree line. That wasn't normal. My motion alerts rarely triggered there unless it was a deer or a big stray dog. I opened the live feed. My jaw tightened. A man was standing halfway behind one of the big oaks near the fence line. Dark jacket, phone up, pointed toward my house. Not close enough to trespass, but close enough to watch. I zoomed in. The camera struggled, but I caught the angle of his shoulders, the way he held his phone sideways like he'd done it 1,000 times. Ross Lond, the shorter brother. He stayed there for maybe 30 seconds, taking photos like a real inspector. Except real inspectors don't hide behind trees. I stepped outside onto the porch, making sure to walk loud enough on the boards that he could hear. Ross vanished into the woods instantly, like a spooked raccoon. I didn't chase him. That would have been dumb. I just stood there with my coffee, watched the tree line, and let the cold morning air clear the fog in my head. There was no doubt now. This wasn't two idiots on an ego trip. This was organized, deliberate. They were collecting evidence. Fake evidence, but evidence nonetheless. I took a long breath, went inside, and added a new entry. Threat log, entry 3, unauthorized surveillance. Then, around mid-morning, while I was in the upstairs hallway stripping old wallpaper, I heard the faint crunch of tires. Not the Lon Brothers SUV this time, something lighter, cleaner. I walked to the front window and peeked through the curtain. A white Lexus was parked near the edge of the road, not on my land, but close enough to make a point. Inside the car, a woman was seated completely still. Perfect posture, dark sunglasses, hair pulled into a tight bun so severe it looked like it hurt. She didn't get out, didn't wave, didn't even pretend to be doing something else. She just stared at the house. Every instinct in me sharpened. I'd heard Crane mention her. Karen Bullock, HOA royalty. The kind of neighbor who doesn't knock on doors. She summons people. There she was, in the flesh, watching my home like a hawk eyeing territory it believed was already its own. I let the curtain fall back into place. Didn't give her the satisfaction of lifting it again. 30 seconds later, the Lexus drove off with the smoothness of something expensive and mean. I walked outside when I heard the engine fading. Sure enough, on the ground near my mailbox, I found a fresh envelope tucked under a rock. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a letter printed on embossed stationery. To maintain neighborhood aesthetics, residents are required to comply with the Stonecrest Architectural Legacy Standard. Failure to meet these standards may result in enforcement, fees, or removal of non-conforming structures. It wasn't signed, just the typed name, Karen Bullock, President, Stonecrest Legacy HOA underneath. Someone had scribbled a handwritten note. This is your final courtesy notice. Final? They hadn't even given me a first. I folded the letter slowly and walked it straight inside to scan. As it uploaded, my stomach twisted with a strange mix of anger and satisfaction. They'd finally shown their hand. No more hiding behind hired muscle. No more pretending this was some routine compliance check. Karen had stepped into the light. And the moment she did, all her shadows slipped right into view. By noon, the sky went gray, clouds rolling in heavy from the west. I spent the early afternoon in the office, digging into the county database, searching public records, HOA filings, anything with Karen's name attached. Most of it was the usual HOA nonsense: board elections, landscaping contracts, meeting notes about lawn height and mailbox color. But then one detail hit me like a hammer. 3 months before I bought the mansion, Stonecrest submitted a preliminary inquiry to the county. Potential acquisition interest for Parcel 11B for community expansion. Parcel 11B, my land, this house. There was a note beside the inquiry. No response from county, status pending. I leaned back in my chair, heart dropping right into place. So, Crane was right. They wanted the land, and they thought the old mansion would collapse before anyone bought it. But I bought it. I restored it. I brought it back to life. And now, I was in the way. The clouds outside rumbled, thunder rolling low across the hills. I stared at the inquiry on the screen. I paid for this place, I said out loud to the empty room, and they want to take it with fake badges and cheap paper. That was the moment I made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend this house. I was going to expose them. Once I knew they wanted the land all along, everything clicked into place. The fake inspections, the threats, Karen's silent drive-by like a hawk measuring the distance to its prey. They weren't reacting to me restoring the mansion. They were reacting to me saving it, ruining their plan to declare it blighted and seize it through code violations. But knowing their motive wasn't enough. I needed proof, hard proof. I spent the next 2 hours digging deeper into the county's online system. Most people don't know this, but a surprising amount of HOA paperwork becomes public record when it deals with expansions, variances, or land use intentions. And Stonecrest. They filed a lot. At first glance, everything looked clean, boring even, meeting notes about flower beds and sidewalk cracks. But then I found something peculiar, a series of filed visual impact assessments from the past year. Most neighborhoods never need those. Only developments trying to justify expansions do. I opened the first one. It was a PDF with grainy photos of my house, taken months before I ever bought it. The roof sagged, shutters hanging crooked, vines choking the porch. In the margin, someone had typed, "Structure likely unsalvageable, potential hazard classification pending." I kept scrolling. Another page. Recommend acquisition for community utility structure or parking. Parking. Crane was right. They wanted to turn the oldest house in the valley into a damn parking lot. But what caught my attention wasn't the text. It was the signature at the bottom. Inspector R. Lond. My lips curled. So, the Lond brothers weren't new to this game. I opened the next assessment. This one had cleaner photos. Same house, same neglect. But the file metadata told the truth. Date taken, 6 months before Ross obtained any inspector certification. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. So they forged the roll before they forged the documents. Interesting. I gathered every file with either Lon Brothers' name and dumped them into a new folder. Stonecrest, evidence, potential fraud. Then I found something even better. A draft document that must have been uploaded by mistake. Title, Blight Preparation Outline, Internal Use Only. I clicked it. What popped up looked like a playbook. An actual step-by-step strategy for forcing non-HOA properties into compliance or condemnation. Steps included stage preliminary complaints, photograph from off-property vantage points, leverage safety concerns where possible, initiate bluff phase, escalate pressure, prepare violation narrative if owner resists. My stomach twisted. This wasn't incompetence. This was organized extortion. And the last bullet point, final option, board president will authorize demolition request if structure declared non-historic. Non-historic. I set my coffee down hard enough to splash a little. They didn't know the truth. This house was historic, older than the HOA by nearly half a century, built before Stonecrest even existed on paper. If they'd done their homework properly, they would have known that, but they didn't, and that ignorance was now a weapon in my hands. I opened another browser tab and searched state law, Virginia Historic Structure Preservation Act, and right there, clear as sunlight, any structure older than 75 years with original architectural components is protected from an compulsory alteration or demolition by non-governmental organizations. Protected? My house wasn't just a restoration project, it was legally untouchable. Unless the owner voluntarily allowed changes, unless the government condemned it, which they couldn't without real violations, unless someone forged documents to make it appear unsafe, which explained the Lon brothers' "we always find something" line. They were planning to. I felt something old and cold settle in my chest. Determination. The kind forged by men who've lived long enough to know when a line has been crossed. I gathered my notes, screenshots, PDFs, and metadata and labeled everything. Order mattered. Narrative mattered. Then I made a decision that might have changed everything. I shut my laptop, grabbed my jacket, and headed toward my truck. I wasn't going to the sheriff, not yet. I was going to see someone who knew the local laws, like gospel, who had lived here longer than Karen had been breathing HOA air. Mr. Crane. If this was truly a battlefield, I needed an old scout who knew where all the landmines were buried. By the time I reached Mr. Crane's place, the late afternoon sun had settled into that warm, syrupy glow that makes everything look older, softer, a little more honest. His porch light was already on, one of those yellow bulbs that hum quietly, like it remembers a world before LEDs. The man himself sat in a rocking chair, ankles crossed, cane leaning against his leg. He didn't look surprised to see me. He never did. "Evening, Declan," he said. His voice always carried the weight of someone who had seen more decades than the rest of the neighborhood combined. "You look like a man dragging a secret behind him." I walked up the steps. "More like pushing one uphill," I answered. He chuckled, which turned into a cough. "Told you this place would stir trouble. Folks around here only like old things if they're the ones bragging about them." I held up the folder in my hand, a thick manila one stuffed with printouts and screenshots. "Crane, I found something. A lot of somethings." He nodded toward the chair beside him. "Sit down, son. Porch is the best place in Virginia to hear bad news." I sat, laid the folder across my lap, and started explaining. The visual impact reports, the secret expansion files, the blight preparation outline, the fact that Karen planned to buy the land cheap under the pretense of community improvement, the Lon brothers faking inspector credentials long before they got any legitimate licensing. Crane didn't blink once, didn't interrupt, didn't even adjust his cane. He just listened, really listened. When I finally finished, he stroked his chin and said quietly, "You stumbled into something folks around here have been whispering about for years." My eyebrows lifted. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, joints creaking. "Stonecrest Legacy ain't just a fussy HOA. They're a business. Expansion, acquisition, and appearance. That's their religion. Everything in this neighborhood is about control." He tapped the wooden armrest. "Your house? It ain't just old. It's a wedge, a problem, a thing they can't control but desperately want to." I let that sit for a moment. Crane continued. "Karen's been gunning for that hilltop long before you got here. She wanted it for a clubhouse expansion project they pitched years ago, but the bank needed a clean title and zero historical obstacles. Can't get that if the house is protected." That matched everything I'd found. Every ugly detail. "What about the Lon brothers?" I asked. Crane's expression hardened in a way I hadn't seen before. "That pair? They ain't inspectors. They ain't officers. They're Karen's hired muscle with nice shirts. Ross tried to sign up for the auxiliary police 10 years ago. Failed the ethics review. David flunked the psych eval. They ain't even supposed to be carrying tasers." Figures. "And people just let them?" Crane gave a slow, bitter smile. "You know how bullies survive, Declan. They find a crowd that's too comfortable to fight back and too embarrassed to admit they're scared." He looked toward my house, my porch light barely visible through the trees. "But you stirred something. Those news clips you gave Channel 8, that ruffled feathers. More than you know." He shifted, reached into the pocket of his cardigan, and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I was waiting to see if you'd come by before I handed you this." I took it, unfolded it. It was a photocopy of an internal HOA memo, dated 8 months ago. Subject, preliminary action plan, hilltop parcel, non-HOA residence. Prepared by President Karen Billilock. Bullet points read, target, bring property into compliance or acquire land via code action. Engage law enforcement for preliminary intimidation. Assess owner vulnerability. Apply coordinated pressure. Implement notice phase, blight, hazard, safety. Long-term plan, convert property for community amenity expansion. My stomach tightened. Everything Crane said was true, but this memo made it official. Crane looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Found that in the trash behind the clubhouse. They toss a lot of secrets when they think no one's looking. I figured you'd make better use of it than I could. I exhaled slowly. This is felony-level stuff, Crane. He nodded. Then hit 'em where they can't hide. Paperwork, sunlight, and a damn good attorney. That's how you kill a bully that pretends to know the law. He didn't say it with anger. He said it like a man giving instructions on how to change a tire. Calm, steady, inevitable. I looked down at the quiet street. Windows were still, curtains barely stirred. Everyone watching, no one speaking. Crane, I said softly, you think they'll back down? He shook his head. No, son. They'll double down. Bullies like Karen always do. But now you've got the truth. And truth lasts longer than intimidation. He leaned back in his chair and added, whatever you do next, don't do it alone. I swallowed. You offering to help? He smiled, eyes twinkling. Help? No, I'm old. Can't fight worth a damn. But I'll stand in your corner, and sometimes that's all a man needs. I nodded. And for the first time since the Lawn brothers stepped onto my gravel drive, I didn't feel alone, not one bit. By the next morning, I felt something in me settle. Not peace, not calm. More like a man who finally realizes he's been pushed as far as he's willing to go. Coffee in hand, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the memo Crane had given me, and the file folder full of evidence, threats, forged notices, and Lawn brothers' lies. For the first time, I wasn't just documenting a problem, I was planning a counterattack. A real one. A quiet, legal, devastating kind of counterattack. I opened my laptop and pulled up the property search records. There it was, the odd little strip of land nobody ever paid attention to. A narrow, neglected sliver of overgrown dirt just beyond my property line. The listing price? Low enough to make me blink twice. The owner? A dormant real estate trust that probably forgot they even had it. I made one phone call. One. And by noon, I had a signed contract in my inbox. That afternoon, I filed the deed transfer. And by the time the sun dipped behind the oak trees in my yard, I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was the owner of enough contiguous land to legally establish a homeowners association of my own. A genuine state-recognized HOA, a competitor, a challenger, a wedge Karen would never ever see coming. I named it the Historic Stonecrest Society. It sounded official, old, respectable, the kind of name that gets attention at municipal meetings. But that wasn't the best part, not even close. I scrolled through the Virginia statutes and smiled when I found the clause I remembered reading 2 days ago. Historic preservation entities may supersede local aesthetic guidelines for purposes of cultural conservation. Meaning, if my new HOA focused on historical preservation, my rules trumped Karen's, legally, flat out. So, I wrote a charter, a simple one objective. Preserve culturally significant structures and prevent aesthetic interference by external governing bodies. I paid the filing fee, submitted the articles of incorporation, and hit submit. Done. Just like that, a one-house HOA, my one house, became a legally protected entity with the power to challenge Stonecrest Legacy's authority. I sat back and laughed. A long, low, quiet laugh. It felt good, real good. By late evening, my county-issued confirmation email arrived. Your HOA filing is approved. I must have read those 5 words 10 times. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and stepped onto my porch. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. Like a pack of wolves watching a stranger light a fire in their woods. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Karen's house. Her porch light flickered on. A shadow passed behind her curtains. I lifted my glass toward the street. Not a toast, not a threat, just a simple acknowledgement. Round 2 belongs to me. The next day came the first ripple. An email popped up in my inbox. Notice of administrative hearing, community expansion proposal review. At the bottom, all HOA entities adjacent to Stonecrest Legacy are invited to participate. I grinned. Well. Looked like they didn't realize yet that I was one of those entities. So I RSVP'd, happily. Then the second ripple arrived. A knock on my door, hard, urgent. I opened it to find Karen herself standing on my porch, arms crossed tight, smile thin enough to cut glass. Well, she said. It seems we have overlap. I leaned on the doorframe. Afternoon, Karen. I didn't know we were neighbors. Her jaw twitched. What is this association you filed? A joke? No joke, I said calmly. Perfectly legal, perfectly recognized, and perfectly capable of attending the expansion hearing next week. Her nostrils flared. Declan, you can't just create a rogue HOA. That's not how this works. I shrugged. Funny, that's exactly how the state says it works. And since my home is a historical restoration, I pointed at the brass plaque on my gate. My rules override your aesthetic policies. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind people wear right before they step on a landmine they think they place themselves. You've made a terrible mistake, she murmured. No, I replied. I made a choice. You're the one mistaking your authority for the law. She turned sharply and stormed back to her Escalade, slamming the door hard enough to send a flock of starlings flying from a nearby tree. She didn't peel out. Karen wasn't the peel-out type. She drove away very slowly, which somehow felt more threatening, more calculated, more wrong. But 2 hours later, the third ripple hit. An email from an anonymous account. Subject: they're planning something. Attachment: audio file. I clicked play. Karen's voice filled my speakers. He thinks he's clever. He thinks paperwork will save him. If the city won't act, we have other options. Then another voice chimed in. Ross. Arrogant, smug. We can shut him down. We just need the right justification. I hit pause, sat back, exhaled, because something had changed. Something big. Before they were sneaky. Now they were desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Big ones. Karen had no idea that she wasn't the only person gathering evidence. No idea that every move she made dug her hole deeper. And no idea that in 5 days, she'd be sitting across from me at a county hearing where my little one-house HOA was legally allowed to speak for the historic district. I closed the laptop, took a long sip of bourbon, and whispered to no one, "Round 3's gonna hurt." The next morning started quiet. Too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that feels like someone's holding their breath. I was pouring coffee when I saw it, through the stained glass window. A white Ford Explorer rolling slowly down my street. Clean. Too clean. Like something fresh from a rental lot. On the door, a magnetic decal slapped on crooked. Community Compliance Unit. Not county, not state, just vague enough to scare the average homeowner. Inside the SUV were 2 men in matching blue polos, not uniforms, not badged, just the kind of coordinated outfit meant to look official if you squint hard enough. The SUV crawled past my driveway like a shark nosing the water. They didn't see the new cameras I installed last night. They didn't see the motion sensors behind the hedges. And most importantly, they didn't see where I told Sheriff Lawson to park. Behind my garage, hidden by the tall cedars. He'd texted me at 8:01 a.m. In position. I'll move when you give the signal. And now the rats had arrived. 9:23 a.m. 3 sharp knocks. I opened the door just a crack. 2 men stood on my porch. Blue polos, fake badge lanyards, clipboards printed from a home office. "Morning, sir," the taller one said with forced authority. "We're here for a community compliance inspection." I blinked at him like I was confused. You're with the city?" "No, sir," he replied confidently. "We're an auxiliary enforcement division. We handle violations before they escalate." "Violations?" I asked softly. "But I haven't heard anything from the county." The shorter one stepped forward, smelling the fear I was pretending to show. "Well, that's why we're here, sir. If you just let us inside, we can perform a safety assessment, quick and painless." Inside. That was their actual goal. Once they stepped foot inside, they could claim anything. Unsafe wiring, structural hazard, aesthetic blight, classic HOA shakedown. I let my shoulders slump. "Oh, I didn't realize it was that serious," I murmured. "What happens if I don't comply?" The taller one puffed up like a rooster. "Well, sir, we can initiate a mandatory entry order, literally force the inspection." There it was, the illegal threat I needed. I slowly lifted my phone, screen facing them. The red recording dot gleamed like a warning light. Both men stiffened. "Sir," one said nervously, There's no need to. A voice drifted from behind them. Mornin', boys. They froze. Sheriff's Deputy Lawson stepped out from the side of my house, one hand resting on his belt, the other brushing aside a low branch. He hadn't approached from the road. He hadn't come in with sirens. He'd walked up quietly through my side yard, exactly how we planned it. His cruiser sat hidden behind my garage, completely out of sight. Mind telling me what you're doing on this man's porch? Lawson asked calmly. The taller fake inspector swallowed. We're conducting a safety inspection. Lawson walked right past me and stopped inches from them. That's so? Because I ran your plates earlier. That vehicle isn't registered to any county department, any state agency, or any subcontractor. Care to explain? The shorter man's voice cracked. We're, authorized contractors. Lawson plucked the fake badge off his lanyard with 2 fingers, held it up to the sunlight, and smirked. Authorized by who? Etsy? Silence. You boys understand impersonating a compliance officer is a crime, right? Lawson continued. A real one. He turned to me. You get all that on video, Declan? 4 angles, high definition, I said. The deputy grinned. Well then, this ought to be fun. He radioed dispatch. Dispatch, I've got 2 individuals impersonating code enforcement. Need a unit to pick 'em up. Both men stiffened, pale as drywall. Lawson shook his head. You HOA boys think you can make your own rules. But here's the thing. Only the state gets to do that. And today, you just bought yourselves a trip downtown. He motioned for them to step aside. The 2 men walked toward the curb like school kids being marched to the principal's office. Heads down, no swagger left. And I sipped my now cold coffee and watched it all unfold like a man who had been waiting a long, long time for justice to walk around the corner. Karen thought she could escalate. Instead, she'd given me felony-level evidence on a silver platter, and she had no idea the worst part was still coming. The hearing was in 2 days. 2 days until she walked into a room where she no longer held the cards. 2 days until the county, and half the neighborhood, learned exactly what she'd been doing behind closed doors. 2 days until everything she'd built began to crack. And I was going to be the one holding the hammer. I knew I had the law on my side, but I wasn't going to walk into a lion's den without a tamer. That's why I called Ezra Merritt. He was the best property attorney in the county, a man who hated HOAs even more than I did. He took one look at my evidence folder and smiled the scariest smile I'd ever seen. The hearing room at the county office was crowded long before I walked in. Word travels fast in small towns, faster when an HOA's dirty laundry is about to be aired in public. By the time I took my seat, every chair was filled, and people stood pressed against the back wall. Reporters balanced cameras on their shoulders. Neighbors leaned in close enough to whisper, but too stunned to speak. Karen sat across the room in an eggshell blazer and a necklace that probably cost more than my truck. Her expression was a blend of confidence and irritation, the kind worn by someone used to winning on paperwork alone. Her attorney adjusted his cufflinks like this was just another zoning formality. Ezra sat down beside me with a calm nod. Just follow my lead, he murmured. I know exactly where to put the knife. The hearing officer called the session to order. Stonecrest Legacy's attorney stood up first, eager, polished, and a little too proud of his own voice. Madam Hearing Officer, he began, Stonecrest Legacy seeks approval for a minor expansion of our community boundary, merely to preserve uniformity and protect neighborhood aesthetics. The property in question, he gestured vaguely in my direction, sits within the visual influence area of our development. It is in the community's best interest that it come under Stonecrest jurisdiction. Karen gave a small, satisfied smile, nodding along as though the argument were already won. The attorney continued, This is not adversarial. This is necessary for cohesion. The Stonecrest community deserves consistency. Ezra rose slowly, smoothing his tie with the quiet confidence of a man about to drop a chandelier on someone's head. Madam Hearing Officer, he said, before we address misconduct or criminal concerns, we need to address one foundational fact. He slid a folder across the table with a soft thud. My client's property, combined with the adjacent parcel he legally acquired, constitutes a recognized homeowners association under Virginia state statute, filed last week and fully approved by the county clerk. A ripple spread through the room. Karen blinked twice, her smile flickering like a bad light bulb. Ezra continued, "This HOA, called the Historic Stone Crest Society, exists exclusively to preserve culturally significant architecture. It holds historical preservation priority under Virginia Code 10.1-2204. He paused just long enough for the words to sink in. That priority supersedes any community aesthetic guidelines or expansion requests by Stonecrest Legacy. Karen shot up from her chair. That's absurd. His HOA is one house. Ezra didn't even look at her. One house is enough under historic designation law, especially when the restoration work is documented. The original architectural plans are preserved, and a state historic registry review is pending. The hearing officer adjusted her glasses. Mr. Merritt, is this accurate? It is, Ezra said, and therefore, under preservation statutes, Stonecrest Legacy is legally barred from expanding into this zone. Their proposal is invalid as a matter of law. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's attorney swallowed hard. But this historic HOA can't simply override. Ezra opened another folder. Yes, it can. The hearing officer nodded once. Then the expansion request is denied on preservation grounds. Karen's mouth fell open. The first crack in her armor appeared. She wasn't beaten yet, but she'd been hit somewhere she never expected. The room buzzed as people leaned to whisper. Ezra's voice cut cleanly through the noise. And now, let's move on to the matter of misconduct. He clicked a remote. The screen behind him lit up with footage of the Lon brothers walking up my driveway, fake badges swinging, voices smug and threatening. Their words echoed through the room. If you don't join the HOA, the city will condemn this place. You won't be able to stop demolition. Karen's attorney stiffened. Ezra played the forged stop-work notice next. Pixelated seal, bogus signature, laughable formatting. Then came the recording from the fake compliance officers on my porch. We can initiate mandatory entry if needed. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered, "That's illegal." Ezra let the room fall silent before loading the next clip. Karen's voice, sharp and unmistakable. "That house is a scar on the face of Stonecrest. If the city won't act, we have other options." Officer Lond is quite cooperative. Shock rippled across the audience. Karen went pale. Her hand clutched the table with white-knuckle tension. Then Ezra placed one last piece of evidence on the table, a blown-up print of the handwritten note she had slipped into my mailbox. "We don't need to fight like this. Retract your statements. Otherwise, we'll continue enforcement actions." K. Handwriting analysis confirms with 99.4% probability that this note was authored by President Bullylock, Ezra said. Karen's purse slid from her lap and hit the floor. She didn't pick it up. Her attorney stood abruptly. "Madam Hearing Officer, I need to withdraw. My client withheld critical information from me. I will not risk my license defending this." He stepped away from her, deliberately. Karen stared at him in disbelief. "You can't leave." He didn't even turn around. The hearing officer exhaled, slow and controlled. "Mrs. Bullylock, this evidence shows impersonation of officers, forged notices, coercion, and abuse of authority." Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The officer continued, "This matter will be referred to the Commonwealth's Attorney for Criminal Review." And with that, the remaining pieces of Karen Bullylock's power crumbled right in her hands. Reporters surged forward. Neighbors whispered in shock. Some looked furious. Some looked relieved. A few simply shook their heads like they finally understood what had been poisoning their community all along. As I turned to leave, I felt a gentle tap on my arm. Mr. Crane stood beside me, cane in hand, eyes calm. "That was a good hit," he said softly. "First with the law, then with the truth. A 1-2 punch. That's how you take down a bully." We walked out together as sunlight spilled into the hallway. For the first time since I'd moved into that old mansion, I felt the kind of peace I'd come here seeking. Real peace. Earned peace. And behind me, in that cramped hearing room, Karen Bullylock sat alone, facing the ruins of everything she'd tried to build at my expense. The morning after the hearing felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just lighter. The air had that crisp Virginia coolness to it, the kind that carries the smell of dew on old brick and wet leaves. For the first time in months, I opened my front door without bracing for some new notice taped across it, some forged violation, some unwanted visitor pretending to be an authority they weren't. Nothing. Just the breeze. and the creak of my front gate as I stepped outside with a mug of coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of stress. Across the street, a few neighbors walked by, people who had avoided eye contact for weeks. Today they nodded. One even raised a hand in a quiet wave. Another murmured, "Good job yesterday," before continuing down the sidewalk. I didn't crave validation. But I'll admit, it felt good. Not in an arrogant way. In a human way. Like the neighborhood had finally exhaled. Up the block, Karen's house sat with its curtains drawn tight. Her for sale sign leaned crooked, half sun-faded. No one lingered near it. No one even parked on that side of the street. Word was she'd left town late last night, quietly, quickly, the way people do when their world shrinks down to consequences and courtroom appointments. The HOA board was already in emergency meetings, scrambling to distance themselves, to rewrite their own history. Some residents, I heard, were filing complaints of their own. Others were demanding refunds for the compliance patrol charges that mysteriously aligned with payments to the Lon Brothers enforcement business. The dominoes were falling exactly how Ezra predicted, but I wasn't thinking about lawsuits or scandals that morning. I was thinking about my house. My old, stubborn, beautiful house. The way the sunlight slipped through the stained glass window and painted the foyer in cobalt and wine red. The way the mahogany arch had taken on that warm glow polished wood gets when it finally feels cared for again. The way the ironwork on the porch cast those delicate shadows. Art Deco swirls dancing across stone the way they must have in 1946. I'd spent months fighting to preserve all of this. Now the house stood exactly how it deserved to stand. Proud, grounded, unbothered. Later in the afternoon, I found myself tightening a loose hinge on the back door when I heard footsteps in the yard. I turned to see Mr. Crane leaning on his cane, smiling like a man who had lived long enough to appreciate poetic endings. "Neighborhood feels quieter," he said. "Quieter's good," I replied. He nodded to the brass plaque I'd mounted on the gate, now polished clean, no tape, no threats stuck to it. Registered historical property. Virginia Registry, number 427B, protected by history, not by HOA. He chuckled. "That last line yours? Guilty. Keep it," he said. Truth's supposed to be simple. We sat on the porch a while, him in the rocking chair, me on the steps, watching the late sun filter through the oak branches. The world didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet, like a battlefield after the smoke clears, when the only things left standing are the ones that mattered all along. "Ezra called this morning," I said. "He thinks the Commonwealth's attorney will take it up. Criminal charges, maybe federal, depending on the forgery." Crane tapped his cane lightly. "You didn't do it to see her punished." "No. You did it so they couldn't do it to the next guy." I nodded. "Yeah. Then you won the right way." A breeze stirred across the porch, carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass and charcoal from some backyard grill down the street. A couple kids rode by on bikes, laughing. A dog barked once and then went silent. It all felt normal. The kind of normal you don't realize you miss until it's been taken from you. By early evening, I walked to the garden, my garden now fully restored, boxwoods trimmed back into their original 1946 symmetry, climbing roses just starting to show color again. The old stones in the walkway warmed under the last rays of sunlight, and for the first time since I bought this place, I didn't feel like I was walking through a project. I felt like I was walking through home. Later that night, as the sky settled into a sugar-gray dusk, I sat on the porch with a cup of strong coffee, the way I used to before all this nonsense started. I listened to the cicadas murmuring in the trees, the faint hum of distant traffic, the quiet thump of my old house settling into itself. I didn't need anything else in that moment. Not victory, not applause, not even the satisfaction of knowing Karen was somewhere far away explaining herself to lawyers. I just needed the silence, the kind I came here to find, the kind I fought tooth and nail to keep. And as I watched the porch light flicker softly over the iron gate, I whispered something I hadn't said since the day I first pulled into the driveway months ago. I'm home. Not hiding, not defending, not preparing for another knock on the door. Just home. Exactly where I wanted to be. Exactly how this story was supposed to end.